The colour of the circle is a representation of the level or ability of the user in that skill. 0 is represented by blue, 100 is represented by red. All levels in between are represented by shades of purple between blue and red. This display as a whole represents one training example for Orbit, which you will need to label as one of the 6 classifications we defined, to teach Orbit how to classify other training examples. The purpose of the coloured circles is to help you quickly classify the training example. Orbit is asking you a question. In your opinion, if you saw a player in your game Apotheosis with the given skill levels, how would you classify this player? This particular training example is dominated by the charge up skill, so I classify it as a charge up. To classify a training example, click on the Orbit console, the grey bar with 2 arrows on the left hand side, and type in the number corresponding to the classification. The classification number was determined by the order you entered them into the classification setup window. If you've forgotten the order of classifications, type -L into the console and press enter to list the classifications and their numbers in the console. Note that the console will serve several purposes. Firstly, the console allows you to enter a classification for a given training example. Secondly, by using console commands, you can customize training examples. A full list of console commands is provided in the section Console Commands in the Orbit User Guide, or can be listed in Orbit by typing -H into the Orbit console. It's time to classify your first training example. Think carefully about what classification is best suited for this training example. Then enter the corresponding number into the console and press enter. Orbit will now give you another training example. Notice that in the inspector there is a table displaying the classification you gave to the example you just finished classifying. Also notice that in the top right hand corner of the Orbit trainer, Orbit has predicted what it believes the classification of this new training example will be. At the moment, this classification won't be particularly accurate, as Orbit has only seen one training example. Continue adding more training examples to Orbit. If you think a training example is unrealistic, or that you've classified too many examples with similar skill levels, you can enter R into the console to reject an example. This example will be deleted and replaced with a new training example. Once you have reached the stage where Orbit is predicting the classification of training examples with a high degree of accuracy, you are ready to test the training of Orbit. Test mode gives you 50 new training examples, which are used to calculate the percentage accuracy of Orbit. To enter testing mode, type -T into the console and press enter. The console will read Training mode complete, testing mode enabled. Just as you did in training mode, classify the examples that Orbit gives you. Notice that in testing mode, Orbit doesn't output its estimated prediction for the example. This is to remove bias when you're classifying a testing example. Once you have classified 50 testing mode examples, Orbit will calculate the classification accuracy and output it to the console. An accuracy of over 80% is sufficient for most game applications, although accuracies closer to 100% are achievable and beneficial. If you are not satisfied with the accuracy of classification, then you can restart the process with the same classifications by typing -W space train into the console. If you are satisfied with the accuracy, we now need to repeat the same process for the player defending network. Highlight the player defending network in the Library Explorer. This will clear the Orbit trainer. As before, click the Start Training button to bring up the classification setup window. Let's use the classifications Blocker, Counter-Attacker for players that parry well, Dodger, Blocker Counter-Attacker for players who are good at both blocking and parrying, and Mix for players that do not specialise. Press Accept and train Orbit to classify example skill sets for the player defending network. Once you have finished testing your training for the player defending network, you have completed using Orbit to implement an adaptive game mechanic in a fantasy RPG. In the next tutorial, we will see how this game mechanic is harnessed in the game.